Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the show. We are going to be running through some of the biggest storylines headed into the NBA Finals. We have a significant amount of time here before the first game starts. It is June 6th, so what is that, next Thursday? So we have time. The media is absolutely going to have time, and they're going to be shoving all different types of storylines down our throats, but figured I'd give my thoughts on some of them as well. Now, I think that the Luka Doncic being the best player in the NBA is probably going to be what leads a lot of these conversations. And I talked about that idea earlier this week as well. I think that we can get very sort of flippant as a, basketball community in terms of recency bias. We always get caught up in it. And I do myself as well. I try and do my best job to sort of stay out of it. But it's also sort of undeniable in some sense. And we just saw Luka again go berserk for the Western Conference Finals. And if you want to look before that, he was not efficient for the majority of the first, call it series and a half. But he was dealing with all these injuries. He stuck it out. He definitely would have missed time dealing with that type of an injury if it were the regular season. But now here he is leading his team to the finals, and it's very commendable what he's done up to this point. And with the fact that Jokic was, taken out by the team that Luka just demolished all series long, is probably going to lead to some of these conversations. Now, I personally feel like I'm not ready to sort of hand the belt over that quick. Jokic was almost maybe a little bit delayed in being handed the, title of the best player in the NBA because of the fact that, and not to make excuses for him whatsoever, right? But he was dealing with teams that had injuries to Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., which is where one of his MVPs came in, because for those who weren't really tuned into Denver, the rest of the team was a total, I don't want to call them a mess. They ended up being, I want to say, the 5 seed, and I'm not saying he unquestionably should have won that MVP, because I'm somebody, I feel like I weigh team success maybe a little bit more. But before I get all the way into this sort of Jokic tangent here, but we just get so obsessed with championships, and I agree that is always the biggest thing in sports, but I don't think it's just whoever won the championship most recently. So Luka, I would imagine I'm going to come out of this finals and still think that Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA. But this is definitely a big series, and we've talked about it before in terms of the face of the league argument. And Luka and Tatum is that debate. And by the way, not that it means anything, and I maybe shouldn't even bring it up. The TNT interview, I felt like, with Luka last night, I don't know, not super charismatic Luka was last night. Some short answers, and it's fine. The broadcast crew, for as amazing as they are, the interview just went a little bit awkward, I thought. That's just me as a former journalism student maybe overanalyzing here. But I think that, this whole face of the league conversation is definitely going to be surrounding this series, and it's going to be between Luka and Jason Tatum. And, those sort of legacy conversations are very much going to be at hand. The Celtics' legacy is absolutely on the line here, given the path to the postseason that they had, that we've already covered in terms of the difficulty. I will say this, when you look at the intensity that the Minnesota Timberwolves brought, especially, again, not to get caught up in recency bias or whatever, but especially in Game 5, and you compare that to the energy the Pacers played with when they played the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, I don't know. I think the Pacers played better, to be honest, than the Timberwolves did. Now, Timberwolves are no doubt a better team, especially so when Tyrese Halliburton goes down with the injury that he did, but do just sort of want to throw that out there. So while we're sort of on the topic, I do want to talk about the Celtics playoff path as well, because obviously the injuries that the Celtics have benefited from for the other teams has been a massive part as to why they haven't had much challenge in their playoffs up to this point. The Celtics made the finals in 2022, which people act like was all these years ago, but it was just 2 seasons ago. And in that postseason run, I'm not saying it was the most difficult path of all time. I'm not really one for the hyperbole like everybody else seems to be online, but they swept Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in the first round 1 year after the Nets beat them, granted without Jaylen Brown, but a little bit of a revenge series there against 2 Hall of Fame players in still very good playing condition. They came back from a 3-2 series deficit against the reigning champ Milwaukee Bucks, granted without Chris Middleton, but still Giannis and Drew, and they went into Milwaukee in Game 6, and Jason Tatum played one of the best games of his career, and then they end up blowing them out at Game 7 at home. And then Eastern Conference Finals, they beat the number 1 seeded Heat in 7 games. So they had this difficult path in the Eastern Conference Finals. They were battle tested, as everybody loves to say. And then they faced the Warriors, and they were physically drained, it seemed like. And mentally, they weren't at the point where they were ready to go into, the arena of the dynasty, the most recent dynasty we've had, potentially in all of American sports, you could say. And they lost, and they fell short. That was being battle tested to me. At this point, the majority of, their key players are still there. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Al Horford. You get Drew Holiday in that mix as well, who wasn't battle tested with that Celtics team in 22, but won the championship the year prior with the Bucks. He's had plenty of postseason experience. Again, I think that, people are just sort of getting wrapped up in the now. The big picture here is the Celtics have had their share of fights in the playoffs these past few years, and they're at a point where, now is the time to capitalize on it. And maybe there's a chance they could get punched in the mouth a little bit in Game 1, but I also don't think that they are going to be sleeping on the Mavericks in any way, especially the way that the way that this is going to go is all week. I mean, we've already seen some of the, media nonsense talking about Jason Tatum didn't celebrate hard enough, that Jaylen Brown was named the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. ESPN's, highlighting Jason Tatum, smiling and rubbing Jaylen Brown on the head, asking, is this enough of a celebration? That nonsense, I think it was Richard Jefferson said that Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic are the 2 best players in a finals matchup between these teams. That Derek Lively, I think Channing Frye said that Derek Lively, they'd take him over Kristaps Porzingis. Every single one of these players is going to at least a little bit of a degree hear about how they aren't any good, because that's the way that the media has been covering the Celtics throughout this entire postseason run, this entire season, despite the fact that, let's, go back to our expectations at the beginning of the year. I think that just about everybody would have picked the Boston Celtics to come out of the Eastern Conference. Who was the second best team in the East? I understand the East is easy, and for the Celtics to say that they didn't have to face off against a really good team in the Eastern Conference, you'd be right. But that team never existed. And, for the Celtics saying they're here because of injuries is just not the case. And, I think the Celtics are going to be extremely ready when this postseason comes around. Like I said, I'm leaning with the Celtics, but that was sort of a long little tangent there. I guess just to run through some other storylines here. We have Kyrie Irving versus the Boston Celtics. Of course, the reunion there, a lot of bad blood in the past between Kyrie and Boston. It seems like a lot of Boston fans, I think, are at a point where that's sort of history, and the Celtics are in their own, different, era, kind of, you could say. This roster construction is just different, and, at least for me as a Celtics fan, I'm kind of over it. I don't have any, grudges at this point. Now, do I love the guy maybe for everything that happened? Not necessarily, but I appreciate the hell out of him as a basketball player, and I'm glad to see that he is sort of refocused his game now. I think it would be sweet if the Celtics beat them, but I don't think there are going to be Boston fans, though, given, this fan base, that are going to be probably pretty toxic about it. But I do think that the whole villain perspective is a little bit sort of washed up. But we also have Porzingis against his former team, for whatever it's worth. Again, I'm curious to see that we get any sort of interactions between he and Luka Doncic, the former teammates. And then just a couple sort of silly ones here. The Grant Williams Bowl, the two teams that Grant Williams spent, the past year with, was with the Celtics for his rookie contract, went to the Mavericks for the first half of the year this season before getting traded in that PJ Washington deal. You could also call this the Brooklyn Nets Bowl, where Kyrie Irving, the big piece that sort of shifted the trajectory of this Mavs team, came from the Nets sort of selling low on him. Celtics were essentially built off of both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, getting them from the Brooklyn Nets deals after trading Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Jason Terry, that whole deal back in the early 2010s. So a little bit of a Brooklyn Nets Bowl. So we have some Wizards representation in the finals, both Kristaps Porzingis and Daniel Gafford, the two starting centers in the finals this year, both on the Wizards last season and in a much better position now, I think it's safe to say. But let me know what your favorite storylines are ahead of the NBA Finals. There's going to be a bunch that are sort of spit out at us over the course of the next week. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We are live every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern on weekdays. So we will be back on Monday. We will see you then. Have a great weekend and take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to